Have you ever noticed how the silence of an empty room can feel louder than a crowded stadium? It's strange, isn't it? You can be surrounded by people, 100 conversations brushing against your ears, laughter bouncing in the air, music filling every gap, and still, the loudest sound is the echo of your own mind whispering, "You're alone." That whisper is ancient. It's older than cities, older than language, older than all the apps you scroll through just to mute it for a while. Thousands of years ago, belonging wasn't optional. You needed your tribe. Alone meant vulnerable. Alone meant danger. Alone meant death. And your nervous system still remembers. Your heartbeat carries the memory of campfires and caves, of the safety of the circle and the terror of being left outside. So when you sit in your apartment, phone in hand, and that heavy silence creeps in, don't blame yourself for feeling unsettled. Your body is convinced that solitude equals threat. But here's the twist. In today's world, the greater danger isn't being alone, it's the frantic, desperate ways we try to escape that aloneness. Because the modern cure for loneliness often works like poison. We flood ourselves with people who don't see us, content that doesn't grow us, noise that doesn't nourish us. We chase endless crowds, endless distractions, endless connections, and then wonder why our chest still feels hollow. Isn't it ironic? We drown in togetherness and still starve for belonging. The truth is, most of us aren't afraid of being alone. We're afraid of meeting ourselves when the noise dies down, afraid of what we'll hear when there's no distraction left to cover it up. That's why solitude terrifies. Not because of the silence, but because silence removes the mask. But let me challenge you right here. What if the very thing you're avoiding, that pause, that quiet, that so-called loneliness, is the doorway to freedom? What if sitting with yourself is the moment you've been running from and longing for all at once? Think about it. We binge shows, swipe profiles, keep every minute filled, all to avoid the mirror of our own company. Yet only in that mirror can we discover something the world can't hand us: self-belonging. And here's the paradox. The more you belong to yourself, the easier it is to belong with others. Because love isn't a rescue mission, it's an overflow. But right now, society is designed to keep you running to the next group, the next party, the next meaningless scroll. And if you've ever woken up after a night of endless connection, feeling emptier than before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's not solitude. That's consumption, filling up with air and calling it a meal. And here's where it gets dangerous. The more we run from true solitude, the more we let the wrong things in. It's like patching a deep wound with glitter, shiny, distracting, but useless. The fear of loneliness becomes the perfect trap, pulling us into shallow bonds, hollow entertainment, and cycles that drain rather than restore us. But listen, I want you to stay with me, because in the next moments, we're going to flip this whole idea on its head. You'll see how solitude, the very thing you've been taught to dread, is actually your greatest ally. You'll understand why facing yourself isn't punishment, but power. And you'll learn how the art of being with yourself unlocks the deepest kind of love you could ever experience. So before you disappear into another distraction, let me ask, what if you gave me just a few more minutes of your attention? Because if you do, you might walk away with something that could change not only the way you see loneliness, but the way you see yourself. Picture this. You walk into a noisy bar on a Friday night. The music is too loud, people are laughing too hard, conversations crash into each other like waves in a storm. For a while you smile, you drink, you nod along, you look around and think, yes, I belong. I'm not alone. But then you go home. You close the door, and the silence that greets you is heavier than it was before. Why? Because deep down, you know you never really filled the emptiness. You just decorated it with neon lights. This is the trap most of us fall into. We confuse noise with nourishment, attention with affection, distraction with connection. It's like eating spoonfuls of sugar when your body is starving for real food. You feel full for a moment, but your soul is still starving. And it's not just bars and parties. It's the endless scroll on your phone, the podcasts you don't even listen to while they play in the background, the group chats that flood your notifications but never touch your heart. It's the shallow content buffet that leaves you emptier than when you arrived. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The fear of solitude doesn't just push us into groups. It pushes us into the wrong groups, the kind that drain instead of energize, the kind where you laugh, but your laugh doesn't reach your chest, the kind where you walk away with a hangover of emptiness. Irony alert, you can spend an entire weekend surrounded by people and still feel lonelier than you did in that quiet room you were trying to escape. Loneliness isn't about how many people are around you. It's about whether you're connected to yourself. The world, though, rewards the opposite. We glorify being busy, being social, being in demand. We post stories of ourselves at concerts, dinners, trips with friends, proof we're not alone. And yet, the more we chase this proof, the more brittle we become inside. Because none of it means a thing if the one person we can't face, ourselves, remains a stranger. Let's pause here. Think of the last time you felt truly alive in your own company. Not scrolling, not background noise, not filling space. I'm talking about that quiet walk where your thoughts made sense. That coffee you sipped while the morning sun painted your room golden. That moment of stillness where you suddenly realized, I like being with me. That's solitude. And it is not the same thing as loneliness. Loneliness is absence. Solitude is presence. Loneliness is a wound. Solitude is a medicine. Loneliness screams, you're incomplete. Solitude whispers, you're whole already. But here's why we resist it. Solitude requires honesty. It strips away the noise and leaves you naked with your truth. And truth can be terrifying. Because in solitude, you hear the questions you've been avoiding. You feel the emotions you've been stuffing down. You face the patterns you've been denying. So instead we run. We pile on commitments, join circles that don't fit, consume content that doesn't nourish, and wonder why we're exhausted. It's like drinking seawater when you're thirsty. The more you take in, the more dehydrated you become. And this is where the false filling gets dangerous. Because the emptier we feel, the more desperate we become for anything to cover it up. That desperation can lead us to toxic relationships, shallow friendships, and a life full of activity, but empty of meaning. Think about it. How many people do you know who are constantly surrounded by others, yet radiate exhaustion instead of joy? How many drown themselves in digital feeds, yet still complain about feeling disconnected? That's not by accident. That's the result of mistaking quantity for quality, noise for depth, distraction for truth. But solitude, when you choose it, when you embrace it, is the exact opposite. Solitude is not running from emptiness. It's walking into it and discovering it was never empty at all. It was just waiting for you. In solitude, you learn to become your own companion. You learn to generate your own warmth instead of begging for scraps of attention. You learn that your value doesn't depend on being invited, accepted, or validated by a crowd. You learn to hear your own thoughts before they're drowned out by everyone else's. And let me tell you, when you cross that line, when you shift from loneliness into solitude, you become dangerous in the best way possible. Because you can no longer be manipulated by fear of being left out. You no longer accept toxic company just to avoid empty rooms. You no longer consume trash for the illusion of fullness. You stop filling your soul with sugar and start feeding it with truth. Here's the irony again. Once you master solitude, you actually attract deeper connections. Why? Because you're no longer approaching people with a void that screams, "Fill me." You approach them from a place of overflow, a place of wholeness. And overflow creates bonds, not out of need, but out of choice. So let me provoke you with this thought. Maybe the fear of solitude isn't really about solitude at all. Maybe it's about the fear of facing the truth that solitude reveals. And maybe, just maybe, that's the exact doorway to your expansion. Imagine what would happen if instead of filling every silence with noise, you leaned into it. If instead of distracting yourself, you listened. If instead of running to the crowd, you stayed with yourself long enough to discover that you are not lacking. The moment you make peace with solitude, the world stops being a place you escape into. It becomes a place you create from. That shift, from consumption to creation, from avoidance to presence, changes everything. And the best part, once you fall in love with your own company, you'll never fear being alone again. Because you'll know the truth. Solitude isn't empty, it's overflowing. So next time you feel the urge to fill the silence with something meaningless, pause. Ask yourself, what am I running from? And what might I find if I just stayed still? Because the crowd will always be there. The noise will always be there. The distractions will always be there. But your truth, your belonging to yourself, that only reveals itself in solitude. And here's the secret. When you learn to belong to yourself, you unlock a power that changes every relationship you'll ever have. That's what we'll uncover next. So let me provoke you with this thought. Maybe the fear of solitude isn't really about solitude at all. Maybe it's about the fear of facing the truth that solitude reveals. And maybe, just maybe, that's the exact doorway to your expansion. Imagine what would happen if instead of filling every silence with noise, you leaned into it. If instead of distracting yourself, you listened. If instead of running to the crowd, you stayed with yourself long enough to discover that you are not lacking. The moment you make peace with solitude, the world stops being a place you escape into. It becomes a place you create from. That shift, from consumption to creation, from avoidance to presence, changes everything. And the best part, once you fall in love with your own company, you'll never fear being alone again. Because you'll know the truth. Solitude isn't empty, it's overflowing. So next time you feel the urge to fill the silence with something meaningless, pause. Ask yourself, what am I running from? And what might I find if I just stayed still? Because the crowd will always be there. The noise will always be there. The distractions will always be there. But your truth, your belonging to yourself, that only reveals itself in solitude. And here's the secret. When you learn to belong to yourself, you unlock a power that changes every relationship you'll ever have. That's what we'll uncover next. So here we are. You've seen how the fear of loneliness can push you toward noise that drains instead of nourishes. You've glimpsed how solitude isn't a punishment, but a secret power. Now let's take it one step further. What does life look like once you stop running from yourself and start belonging to yourself? It looks like this. Relationships stop being cages. They become gardens. You stop begging for scraps of affection and start sharing from overflow. Suddenly, you're not clinging to people out of fear. You're choosing them out of joy. That changes everything. See, when you don't know how to sit with yourself, every relationship feels like a lifeline. You grip it too tightly, you panic when it loosens, you drown in insecurity. But when solitude becomes your ally, relationships feel lighter, freer. You realize, I can be with you, but I don't need you to complete me. That's not arrogance, that's liberation. And here's the paradox. The less you need people to fill your emptiness, the deeper and more authentic your connections become. Because now, when you sit across from someone, you're not projecting your fear onto them. You're not secretly asking, will you save me from myself? Instead, you're saying, I've already met myself. I like what I found, and now I'd love to share that with you. Think of how magnetic that energy feels. Who wouldn't want to be around someone who radiates wholeness instead of hunger? This is why solitude isn't just about you. It's about everyone whose life touches yours. Because when you overflow, you give. When you overflow, you inspire. When you overflow, you stop spreading fear and start spreading freedom. But let's be real. Embracing solitude isn't glamorous. It's not the kind of thing that looks good on Instagram. Nobody's applauding when you spend a Friday night alone journaling, or taking a walk under the stars, or simply breathing in your own company. The world doesn't reward solitude. It rewards noise, which is why solitude takes courage. And maybe that's the real fear we all carry. Not loneliness, not silence, but the courage it takes to be honest with ourselves when no one else is watching. That's why solitude is powerful. It trains your soul in honesty. It teaches you to stop hiding behind the crowd. It shows you the raw, unfiltered version of you. And it dares you to love that person. Here's the breakthrough. Once you love that version, no one can take that away. No rejection, no absence, no silence can shake the ground you've built inside. That's freedom. Now imagine what happens when more people learn this. Imagine a world where people don't chase shallow groups just to feel seen. Imagine relationships built not on fear of loneliness, but on joy of connection. Imagine communities where each person stands whole, and together they create something even greater. That's not a utopia. That's a possibility. And it starts with you. So next time fear whispers, don't be alone. Answer it with a new truth. I'm never truly alone when I belong to myself. Then take the step. Put down the distraction, close the door, light the candle, sit with the silence. At first, it may feel like an awkward stranger, but soon it becomes a trusted friend. And in that friendship with yourself, you discover the key to every other bond you'll ever build. Because here's the secret we've been circling the whole time. Solitude is not the end of love. It's the beginning. Only by learning to be with yourself can you truly be with others. Only by finding home within can you create home around you. And if you've listened this far, you already know this isn't about avoiding loneliness. It's about rewriting your relationship with it. Loneliness says, you're incomplete. Solitude says, you're already whole. Loneliness drains you. Solitude expands you. Loneliness makes you run. Solitude teaches you to stay. Now I'll leave you with this invitation. If these words resonated with you, don't just keep them. Share them. Share this message with someone you know is running from their own silence. Someone who fills their life with noise but still feels empty inside. Because maybe what you heard here is the key they've been searching for. Maybe today, you are the bridge that helps them see that solitude isn't their enemy, but their liberation. So let's break the cycle together, not by drowning in crowds, but by standing whole, side by side, each of us carrying the strength we found in our own solitude. That's how fear turns into freedom. That's how emptiness becomes expansion. And that, my friend, is how solitude stops being a shadow and becomes a gift.